In the valleys below the mountain, families were sleeping in their tents. Cook fires were burning down to embers. Children were dreaming. The night was ordinary in every way an ordinary night could be. 2,800 meters above them, 200 figures stood at the summit of Mount Hermon in absolute silence. They had not climbed there. They had descended. And before the sun rose on those valleys, every Nephilim that would ever walk the earth had already been conceived. The mountain has carried their oath in its name ever since. We just stopped translating it. The story begins in Genesis. The details are written in the Book of Enoch, a text quoted by the Apostle Jude in the New Testament, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and treated as authoritative by the earliest Christian writers. Tertullian read it. Irenaeus cited it. Justin Martyr referenced it. The mountain is real. You can stand on it today. Its peak rises 2,814 meters above the modern Israeli border. Its slopes are still considered cursed ground in the oldest traditions of three religions. And what happened on its summit before the flood is the most disturbing event in pre-human history. This is what the 200 angels did on Mount Hermon. This is who they were by name. This is what they swore. This is what they taught the human race. And this is the chain, buried 4,000 years deep, that connects that mountain to a single question Jesus asked his disciples standing at its base. Pay attention. By the end of this video, that question will land differently than it has ever landed before. Genesis chapter 6 begins with one of the strangest sentences ever written. When men began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The sons of God. In Hebrew, the phrase is Bene Elohim. 3 syllables, 2 words. One of the most contested terms in the entire Old Testament. Some readers want this phrase to mean human beings, pious men, descendants of Seth, sons of kings, something safe, something domestic, something that does not violate the categories of our modern theology. But the Hebrew Bible does not let us off that easily. The exact phrase Bene Elohim appears in 3 other places in the Old Testament. Job chapter 1 verse 6, Job chapter 2 verse 1, Job chapter 38 verse 7. In every single instance, it refers to angelic beings standing in the presence of God before the throne. Not men, not kings, not descendants of Seth, angels. The earliest Jewish readers of Genesis 6 understood this. The translators of the Septuagint, Jewish scholars working 3 centuries before Christ, rendered the phrase as angels of God directly. The writers of the New Testament agreed. The earliest church fathers agreed. For 300 years of Christian history, no serious teacher proposed any other meaning. Then something disturbing happened. In the 4th century, the meaning was changed. Not corrected, changed. The new interpretation said the sons of God were descendants of Seth, marrying daughters of Cain. A clean human story. A moral lesson about intermarriage. Safe, domestic, containable. But that interpretation has a problem. It does not explain why their children were giants. It does not explain why God flooded the entire planet over the marriages of Seth's descendants. It does not explain why Jude, the half-brother of Jesus, wrote that these beings are now imprisoned in chains of darkness awaiting judgment. Jude chapter 1 verse 6. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Notice what Jude says. They had a position. They had a dwelling. They left it. They crossed a boundary they were never supposed to cross. And the next verse, verse 7, directly links them to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah for the same sin: sexual transgression across categories. Beings entering forms God had not designed for them. This is not a metaphor. This is what the Apostle Peter confirmed in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. And then Peter does something extraordinary. The very next verse jumps directly to Noah and the flood. He links them. The angels sinned. The flood came. The two events are not separate stories. They are the same story. The angels are real. The sin is real. The flood is the response. And the location of that sin has a name. The Book of Enoch, chapter 6, is where the curtain is pulled back. The text gives details that Genesis does not. Names, numbers, a location, an exact moment in human history. It happened in the days of Jared. Jared was the father of Enoch, the sixth generation from Adam. The book of Genesis records him by name in chapter 5, verse 15. He lived 962 years. His son Enoch was the seventh generation from Adam, the same Enoch who walked with God and was taken without dying. The fall of the angels happened in the days of Enoch's father. This is not vague mythology. This is dated, anchored, generationally placed. The Book of Enoch, chapter 6, verse 1 continues. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. They looked, they desired, they decided. 3 actions, 1 catastrophe, and one of them, their leader, hesitated. Verse 3 records his exact words. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. Stop and feel the weight of that sentence. The leader of 200 angels, beings who had stood before the throne of God, was afraid. He was not afraid of God. He was afraid of his own followers. He was afraid they would back out at the last moment and leave him alone in the rebellion. So he demanded a guarantee. Verses 4 and 5 record their response. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. They swore. They bound themselves. They cursed themselves if they broke the agreement. And then verse 6 records the most precise geographic detail in the entire Book of Enoch. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. The mountain is named after the oath. In Hebrew, the word for ban, for curse, for an oath sworn under penalty of destruction, is Herem. Mount Hermon, Mount of the curse, Mount of the oath. The mountain was not named by men. It was named by the beings who landed on it. Every shepherd, every soldier, every traveler who has passed beneath its peak for 4,000 years has spoken the name without knowing what they were saying. Imagine the moment of the descent itself. 200 beings of fire and command lowering themselves through the night air onto a single peak. Not falling, descending, deliberate, coordinated, silent. The mountain beneath them was the highest point in the region. a natural altar reaching almost 3 kilometers into the sky. Imagine standing in a valley below and looking up at that moment. You would have seen lights. You would have heard nothing. You would have known something had changed in the order of the world, but you would not have known what. The Book of Enoch then does something a forgery would never do. It names the leaders. Verse 7 lists 20 of them, the chiefs of tens, each commanding 10 subordinate angels. Semjaza, their leader. Arakiba, Ramil, Kokabel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Batarial, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapel, Satarel, Turel, Jomjael, Sariel, and one more. The 20th, 20 names, 20 commanders, 200 warriors of the air, each one a being created to worship the throne of God, each one now bound by oath to violate the order of the throne forever. And before the sun rose on Mount Hermon the next morning, they came down from the summit into the valleys of men. The angels did 2 things to the human race. They took and they taught. The Book of Enoch, chapter 7, verse 1, records what they took. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And the children of these unions were not human. The Book of Enoch, chapter 7, verse 2. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants. The Hebrew word in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 for these children is Nephilim, from the root naphal, meaning to fall, the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. They were not just tall men. They were not just unusually large humans. The Book of Enoch describes them as towering beings with appetites no human society could feed. They consumed harvests. They consumed livestock. And when there was no more food left, they turned on the humans themselves. Imagine living under their dominion. Imagine walking past a market and seeing one of them rising above the city walls. Imagine the ground trembling beneath your feet as they moved. Imagine watching them take whatever they wanted, whoever they wanted, knowing that no human being on earth could stop them. Centuries later, long after the flood, the Israelite spies entered the land of Canaan and saw a remnant of these giants in the descendants of Anak. Their report is preserved in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. That was a shadow. That was a leftover. That was a fragment of what existed before the flood in its full and unbroken form. In the world of the Nephilim, ordinary men were insects beneath their feet. There is no record from the pre-flood world of a single human leader, a single king, a single empire that resisted them. The texts are silent because there were no survivors to record what happened in those cities. Whatever civilizations existed before Noah's flood, whatever languages, whatever architecture, whatever achievements, were erased without remainder. The only voice that returns to us from that world is the silence of a population that lost. Imagine generations of mothers giving birth to daughters they knew would not be safe past childhood. Imagine fathers teaching their sons how to hide instead of how to fight, because no human being could fight what was walking through their valleys. Imagine entire bloodlines that simply stopped reproducing because the next generation would become food for something that no longer recognized them as kin. The Book of Enoch says the giants drank blood. The Book of Enoch says the earth itself was defiled. The Book of Enoch says nothing was untouched. But the angels did not only take wives and father monsters, they also taught. And what they taught was forbidden knowledge. The Book of Enoch, chapter 8, gives the breakdown. It assigns specific teachings to specific fallen angels by name. This is not vague mythology. This is a list, a ledger, a record of who corrupted what. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He showed them how to extract metals from the earth and how to forge them into weapons. He taught women cosmetics, the use of antimony, the beautifying of the eyelids, the dyes for coloring the body. He taught vanity and violence in the same generation, in the same villages, in the same homes. Semjaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. The first sorcerers, the first poisoners. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. The first counter-magic. The first sorcerer's defense against another sorcerer's spell. Barakajal taught astrology. The first attempt to read fate in the stars instead of in the Word of God. Kokabel taught the constellations, the mapping of the sky into pagan gods. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds, weather divination. Sariel taught the courses of the moon, the first lunar cult. Look at that list and feel what it actually was. It was not random. It was systematic. It was a curriculum, a complete corruption of human consciousness across every dimension of life. War, beauty, magic, medicine, astrology, religion. Every category through which a human being relates to the world was poisoned by an angel who had once stood before the throne and now stood in front of an audience of men. The Book of Enoch, chapter 8, verse 2, summarizes the result in one devastating sentence. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. The world was changed. The Hebrew of Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 says it with terrible economy. Every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Not sometimes evil, not mostly evil, only evil, every thought, every intention, every moment of every day. This was not gradual decline. This was active corruption. This was deliberate engineering of a society in which evil had become so saturated, so total, so normalized, that no one could remember what righteousness had ever looked like. The angels did not give humanity a flawed gift. They gave humanity a curriculum designed to break it. The Book of Enoch says that within a single generation after their arrival, every craft, every art, every science had been twisted toward darkness. Weapons replaced tools. Cosmetics replaced modesty. Sorcery replaced prayer. Astrology replaced the simple confession that God made the stars. The architecture of the human soul had been redesigned by beings who hated everything human about it. That was the world the 200 made, and the earth began to scream. The Book of Enoch, chapter 7, verse 6 records what happened when the Nephilim consumed everything humanity could produce, and the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. The ground itself cried out. This is not metaphor. This is the same language used in Genesis chapter 4 when the blood of Abel cried out from the ground after Cain killed him. The earth has a voice in the Hebrew Bible. The earth testifies. The earth groans under what is done upon it. And in the days of the Nephilim, the earth's groaning reached heaven. The Book of Enoch, chapter 9, verse 1 continues. And then Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. 4 archangels, standing at the edge of heaven, looking down on a planet they could not recognize, and they brought the case before God. Verse 2 records their plea. And they said one to another, the earth made without inhabitant cries, the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. The Hebrew imagination here is staggering. The earth is not silent. The earth is screaming, and the screams are climbing the wall of heaven itself, hitting the gates, demanding a response. And the response came. God commanded the archangel Uriel to warn Noah of what was coming. God commanded Raphael to bind Azazel hand and foot, throw him into the rough places of the desert, and cover him with darkness until the day of judgment. God commanded Gabriel to incite the giants to destroy themselves in mutual warfare, to set the Nephilim against the Nephilim until they had consumed each other. And God commanded Michael to bind Semjaza and the rest of the 200 under the earth, in the valleys of the earth, for 70 generations, until the day of their final judgment. This is what Jude was referring to when he wrote that the angels are kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness. This is what Peter was referring to when he wrote that God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains. The location is real. The chains are real. The prisoners are still there. They have been there since the days of Noah, awaiting the day of the great judgment. And the flood came not just to wipe out the Nephilim. It came to seal the doorway they had opened. It came to drown the corruption back into silence. It came to give humanity one clean line, one family of Noah, through which the promised seed could still be born. Now jump forward. 2,500 years after the flood, maybe more. A small group of men is walking along the base of a mountain in the north of Israel. The peak above them rises into the sky almost 3 kilometers high. Its slopes are still considered haunted ground by every culture in the region. Its name is Mount Hermon. The same mountain, the exact same mountain. At its southern base sits a city the Greeks called Panias, after the goat god Pan, whose grotto was carved into the cliff face there. The Romans called it Caesarea Philippi. The Jews avoided it because they considered it the most spiritually defiled location in the Holy Land. Archaeologists have found the ruins of 14 separate temples to Baal in that region. The cave at the foot of the cliff, where a freshwater spring rose from the ground, was called by the locals the Gates of Hades, the entrance to the underworld, the doorway through which the dead gods of paganism returned to the earth each spring. It was the most demonically saturated address in the ancient world. The cliff face at Caesarea Philippi rises straight up from the spring. Carved into the rock are niches, small stone alcoves where statues of pagan gods once stood. Travelers brought offerings. Worshippers of Pan performed acts inside those niches that pious Jews would not even speak aloud. Ritual prostitution was practiced openly at the cliff face. Whatever spiritual filth could be invented in the imagination of fallen humanity had a shrine carved into that rock. Imagine the moment those 12 disciples realized where their teacher had walked them. They were Jews. They had been taught from childhood to avoid this exact place. The pagan idols still occupied the niches above their heads. The smell of recent sacrifices drifted from the grotto, and here they stood, at the foot of the most defiled cliff in their world, waiting for Jesus to speak. And every step Jesus took toward that cliff was a step deeper into enemy territory. He did not come there by accident. He did not stumble onto cursed ground. He walked his disciples to the foot of the cliff deliberately. He chose that location for the most important confession in the New Testament because he wanted them to understand exactly what kind of war they were enlisting in. And it sat at the foot of the same mountain where 200 angels had once sworn an oath to corrupt the human race. And there, in that exact place, beneath that exact peak, in front of that exact cave, Jesus chose to ask his disciples a question. Matthew chapter 16 verses 13 through 18 records the moment. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They gave him the rumors: John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah. Then he sharpened the question, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered him, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus did not smile politely and move on. He turned and faced the cliff. He turned and faced the cave. He turned and faced the mountain. And he said, "And I tell you, you are Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." The gates of hell. He was standing in front of the cave that the pagans called the gates of Hades. He was standing at the foot of the mountain where 200 angels had first opened the doorway between heaven and earth in rebellion. He was standing on cursed ground, and he was declaring war. 2,000 years before, the rebellion had begun on that summit. 200 fallen beings had sworn an oath to corrupt humanity, and they had succeeded. The flood had come. The chains had been forged. The prisoners had been buried. But the corruption had survived inside the ark. It had risen again in Ham, in Babel, in Canaan, in Sodom, in every empire that came after. And now, at the foot of the same mountain, the second Adam was standing in human flesh and saying it ended here. The gates would not prevail. The church he was about to build, the line of redeemed humanity, would push back into the very ground where the angels had landed. The mountain that 200 named had now been answered by one. Now bring this all the way down to this moment. The story of Mount Hermon is not a piece of ancient mythology. It is the original template of how rebellion enters the world. A boundary is crossed, an oath is sworn, a teaching is given, a corruption spreads, a generation is consumed, and the same pattern is happening right now. You are watching this in an era where every boundary God established is being deliberately erased. Categories of male and female, categories of life and death, categories of human and machine, categories of light and darkness, each one being dissolved by voices that promise enlightenment and deliver enslavement. The Book of Enoch warned that the Nephilim would return in the last days. Jesus warned that the days before his coming would be as the days of Noah. You are not reading prophecy from a distance. You are inside it. Maybe you are watching this and feeling something you cannot name. Maybe you have noticed that the world has stopped making sense in a way you do not have words for. Maybe you have looked at the news, at the streets, at your own life, and realized that every safe category you grew up inside has been dissolved. That is the world the 200 wanted. That is the curriculum they taught. That is the inheritance you are living inside. And the same question that Jesus asked his disciples at the foot of Mount Hermon is being asked of you right now in this room. Who do you say that he is? That question is not academic. It is not theological. It is the line that determines which side of the war you stand on. 200 beings of fire and command swore an oath against humanity on a mountain 4,000 years ago. One man of flesh and blood broke their oath on a cross 2,000 years ago, and the door he opened is still open, but not forever. The same God who waited 1,600 years before sending the flood is waiting now. The mountain still stands. The cave is still there. The question is still being asked. What you do with it will outlast everything else you do. If this opened your eyes to something you have never seen before, stay with us. Subscribe. Every week we go deeper into the mysteries the world has chosen to forget. The evidence is only beginning.